Hi, I'm Marin, and the last thing my sister ever said to me as family was, "You're selfish." She said it after she slapped me, because I told her no for once. My mom? She didn't flinch. She just said, "Her future matters. Yours never has." That was the day I walked out, and the day they started losing everything. But the truth? They started losing the moment they tried to erase me. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you right now? Drop it in the comments, because this story, you're going to feel it. The morning started the way most of them did. Quiet, cold, and heavy, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like even sound would freeze. The heater rattled weakly against the Minnesota winter as I sat at the dining table, my laptop open, eyes locked on the blueprint of the community center proposal I'd spent weeks refining. It was the first project that truly had my name on it, my chance to be seen for something of my own. Then the front door slammed. Boots hit the hardwood, and Celia's voice carried through the hall before I even looked up. "Marin, you need to drive me to the rink, now." I didn't answer right away. She always came in like that, like the world should rearrange itself to make space for her urgency. I ran my tongue across my teeth, steadying myself, and finally said, "I can't. I've got a submission deadline." Celia appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her training jacket, her hair slicked back like she'd just stepped out of an ad. "You can't?" she repeated, like the word didn't exist in her language. "You don't have practice. You're just drawing things." "I'm working," I said, still typing. Her laughter was sharp. "Marin, you can't say no to me." And maybe that was true. At least, it always had been. But something about the way she said it this time, like it was a law of nature, made something in me twist. I met her eyes, felt my pulse in my throat, and said, "I just did." For a moment, the air went thin. Then her hand came fast. A crack split the air, my cheek stung, and my white scarf slipped from my neck onto the floor. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just looked at her, my sister, my parents' pride, the one who never had to apologize. From the kitchen, I heard the rustle of the newspaper. My mother didn't look up from her coffee. "Celia," she said calmly, "don't let this nonsense ruin your focus. You have nationals coming up." My father exhaled, the sound more tired than angry. He turned one page, eyes fixed on the print. And that, more than the slap, was the moment I knew nothing was going to change here. I bent down, picked up the scarf, and wrapped it back around my neck. The fabric smelled faintly of the detergent Mom always used, something lavender but too clean, too sterile. It felt like pretending. I tied it tighter this time, not for warmth, but for something to hold on to. Celia was still standing there, chest rising and falling, expecting me to crumble. When I didn't, she scoffed. "You've always been so dramatic," she muttered, grabbing her skates from the counter. "You're lucky Mom and Dad even let you stay here after you quit your last job." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to explain. She stormed out the door, the cold air rushing in behind her, cutting through the warmth. I turned toward the kitchen. My parents didn't look up. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. Mom took another sip of coffee. "Turn the lights off when you go." No one else spoke. I went upstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound on the carpet. The room I'd grown up in still had the same posters I'd taped to the wall as a teenager. Paint swatches, sketches, a print of falling water. I packed one bag, laptop, a few clothes, my sketchbook. The scarf stayed around my neck. Outside, the snow had started again, soft flakes spiraling under the streetlight. I stepped out onto the porch and felt the air burn my lungs. Behind me, the window glowed faintly, and I could see silhouettes moving inside, my family, still sitting, still unbothered. I took one last look at the house, the driveway where Celia had learned to balance on her first skates, The steps where I'd once waited for my father to drive me to art class before he'd forgotten. Every memory in that place felt borrowed. The wind caught the edge of my scarf and lifted it for a moment, like it was trying to pull me forward. I let it. As I walked down the frozen driveway, my boots crunching through layers of old ice, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't know it yet, but walking away wasn't losing them. It was the start of finding me. I kept walking until my legs stung from the cold. Then I got in the car. I didn't know where I was going, and that was the first honest thing I'd done all day. The wind picked up as I pulled out of the driveway. Snow swirled around the headlights like static, making the road ahead look more like smoke than pavement. I didn't even bother turning on the defroster right away. Let the cold creep in, let it settle on my skin and remind me that I was still here. Somewhere between the suburbs and the empty stretch of highway, I turned on the radio, just noise to fill the silence. Jazz. Of course, Mom's favorite. Muted horns and soft piano notes filled the car like an old memory I hadn't asked for. I snapped it off. The silence felt cleaner. Silence used to feel like absence. Tonight, it felt like proof. Proof that I'd left. Proof that I was alone. Proof that, maybe for once, I'd chosen myself. I didn't have a plan. The storm was getting worse, and I knew this part of Minnesota could get ugly fast. But instead of heading toward a motel, I found myself drifting north, toward Duluth, toward her. Joan Keller hadn't heard from me in years. The last email I sent her was never opened, and the last message she left me went unanswered. But when I thought of the word safe, her face still came to mind. She'd been my professor during my final year in architecture school, but more than that, she'd been the only adult who saw me before I disappeared into my family's shadow. The drive stretched long, the snow thickened, the tires hissed on ice. My fingers clutched the wheel, not from fear, but from something deeper, like I was hanging on to the only thing I still had control over. The white scarf around my neck had gone damp with melted snow. I adjusted it. It felt like armor now. Somewhere past a closed diner and a snow-buried gas station, a memory hit me, so sharp it pulled breath from my chest. Celia's 10th birthday. I was 15, hunched over cardboard and foam board for weeks, building a model skating rink for her. I cut tiny bleachers, painted lines, glued down little plastic figurines. I even added a banner with her name. When I gave it to her, she barely looked. "It's crooked," she said. "Can't you do anything straight?" And Mom? "She's got standards, Myron. Learn from her." I did learn. I learned that my best was never enough, and that silence was safer than asking to be seen. My jaw clenched as I drove. The memory faded, but the weight of it stayed. By the time I reached Joan's apartment in Duluth, the storm was in full tantrum mode. I parked, half blind, in front of a 3-story brick building I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. The lights were on. I stood at the door for a moment, unsure if I had the right to knock. But I did, and when the door opened, there she was, smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a thick robe, hair silver now. She blinked. "Well," she said, voice soft, "you look like a woman who's been erased." I almost smiled. Instead, I said, "Maybe I erased myself trying to fit their frame." Joan stepped aside. No questions, just space. That was her magic. Inside, it smelled like cedar and peppermint tea. Books stacked along the walls, sketch pads half filled on the coffee table. She didn't press. She handed me a cup and let me sit. The tea burned my palms in a good way. "You hungry?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just tired." We didn't talk right away. The clock ticked. The storm hissed against the windows. Eventually, she said, "Families, they're like mirrors, you know. But some mirrors are warped. You keep staring, hoping to see yourself. But all you see is what they want you to see." I exhaled slowly. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, I'd earn peace. Or maybe approval. Joan nodded. But you can't fix people who like the way they hurt you. I looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes held no pity, just recognition. She offered the couch. I accepted. We talked until the sky turned from black to bruised blue. Not about plans, not even about Celia. Just about quiet things, boundaries, loneliness, the strange relief of not being needed. Sometime past 4 a.m., I closed my eyes. Then my phone buzzed, and buzzed again. Screen lit up. 27 messages, 3 missed calls. Mom collapsed. Come back now. She's in the hospital. I stared at the screen, my hand frozen. Joan hadn't noticed. I'd turned the sound off hours ago. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my coat. They never called when I stayed, only when I left. By the time I got in the car, the snow had started to melt into a slushy gray mess that lined the curbs and soaked through boots. The sky was colorless, just a wide stretch of ash-colored morning, the kind that made everything feel like it was holding its breath. I hadn't replied to any of their messages, not even the ones that said urgent. But I packed anyway, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I knew how guilt worked in families like mine. It didn't ask if you were ready. It dragged you back with words like duty and she's still your mother. The drive back to the house felt shorter than I remembered, or maybe it just felt smaller. The town hadn't changed. The corner pharmacy still had that old plastic sign half lit. The bakery still had the crooked help wanted poster in the window. But I had changed. Something in me didn't bend the same way anymore. When I pulled into the driveway, I caught my own reflection in the window. Not my face, just a shape, faint and pale behind the frost. It looked like someone watching themselves from the outside. Sometimes love is the only reason we walk back into the fire. At the hospital, the lights were too bright, the air too dry, the kind of place that made you speak softer without realizing it. Room 112. Mom lay in bed, thinner than I remembered, with wires on her wrist and tape on her neck. Her lipstick was still perfect. You came, she said, not even looking up from the tray of untouched food beside her. Good. Celia has nationals in 3 weeks. We can't have her distracted. That was it. Not, thank you. Not, I'm glad you're here. Just, strategy. You fainted, Mom, I said, pulling the chair out slowly. You should rest. She gave a slight smile, like I was being quaint. Rest is for people who didn't waste potential. Celia was in the corner, scrolling through her phone like this was a waiting room before a manicure. Her earbuds were in, and I wasn't even sure she heard what Mom said. I sat there for a while, let the silence fill the corners. Sometimes silence tells more truth than words. Later that afternoon, Dad asked me to grab the insurance folder from his desk at home. His tone was flat, as always. Not cold, not warm, just beige. The study was just as I remembered. Dark wood paneling, the same desk lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. I found the folder, thick with documents, yellow tabs sticking out the sides. But beneath it, something caught my eye. A manila envelope, my name written in ballpoint across the top. I opened it, thinking maybe it was an old tuition form or something from college. It wasn't. It was the deed to the house. Or rather, it used to be. An amendment had been filed, dated last week. My name, once listed as a secondary heir, had been removed. I stared at the line where my name used to be. Now it was blank, or worse, replaced. They made it official. I'm erased. Sometimes loss isn't about death. It's about deletion. I didn't cry. I folded the papers back the way I found them and slipped them into my coat. That part of me, the one that used to search for an explanation, was quiet now. Back at the hospital, I sat beside Mom's bed again, pretending nothing had shifted. She talked about Celia's training schedule. Celia barely looked up. Dad flipped through a magazine. No one mentioned the envelope. That night, back at the house, Joan called. "How's your mom?" she asked. "Still controlling the room," I said. "She always did love center stage," Joan said gently. Then her tone changed. "Don't let pity drag you back under." I looked out the window. The snow had stopped. Just wet rooftops now sagging under the weight. I said, "I won't." And I meant it. Later, while I was changing into pajamas in the guest room, a knock came at the door. I opened it. Celia leaned against the frame like she lived there, and in every way that mattered, she did. "Mom says you'll help me with sponsorship prep tomorrow," she said. I blinked. "I'm not sure I'm here for that." She laughed, a small, sharp sound. "You never are. That's why you're replaceable." I didn't answer. She turned to walk away, calling over her shoulder, "Be ready by 10. She didn't know I'd already found proof of how replaceable I'd become. I closed the door softly after Celia walked away, her heels tapping down the hallway like punctuation marks on everything unsaid. My fingers rested on the knob a second longer than necessary. I hadn't planned to stay the night, but now I knew I needed to. Not to help, just to watch. The next morning, the house was wrapped in that kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, just strained, like the walls remembered every raised voice and swallowed insult. The air still smelled faintly like the eucalyptus balm Mom used when we were kids. I moved through the hall like I didn't belong there anymore, but the floorboards still creaked in the same places, reminding me that I once did. In the kitchen, I paused. The light filtered through the window, casting pale gray streaks across the table where I'd once sat with a lunchbox and scraped knees. It looked the same, every corner, every cupboard, but it felt like a memory caught in amber, preserved, but lifeless. Coming home is like walking into a photograph. You can see yourself, but you don't belong there anymore. Celia was already there, in leggings and a designer hoodie, sipping a green smoothie like it tasted better than the tension in the room. She was mid-sentence, something about sponsorship deadlines and hair trials. Leora sat at the head of the table, robe pressed, slippers clean, as if her hospital stint had only been a brief inconvenience to her control. I sat without a word. Celia went on, waving her phone around as if the text messages on it were national headlines. "I need you to scan the contract, Mom. The PR firm's asking for a revised clause by noon." "I'll handle it," Leora replied briskly, not even glancing up. "But we need Marin to sit in with you for the press walkthrough. Optics matter." I looked at both of them. "Do you ever hear yourselves? You talk like everything's fine." Leora didn't flinch. She just took another bite of her toast. "Don't start, Marin. You always take things too personally." I kept my voice steady. "That's because they happened to me personally." The sentence landed like a dull thud. For a moment, neither of them moved. Even Celia's smoothie stayed in midair. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. The air seemed to shrink as I laid it on the table and slid it forward. "You signed me off this house." My tone was even, like I was reading the weather report. Leora's hand froze, still holding the butter knife. Celia tilted her head, unimpressed. "You left," she said with a half shrug. "Actions have consequences." I leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "So do lies." That was the crack. The silence after was brittle, dangerous in its stillness. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Sometimes the quiet breaks things more than shouting ever could. Leora finally spoke, her voice softer than expected. "You still wear that old scarf?" I hadn't noticed until then that I'd instinctively wrapped the white scarf around my neck again that morning. I nodded. "It keeps me warm, even when home doesn't." She looked at me then, really looked. For the first time since I'd returned, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not regret, not guilt. Something closer to fear, or maybe recognition. "I suppose you want to be written back in," she said, not quite a question, more of a preemptive strike. "I didn't come back for a place on your list," I said. "I came back to see who I was without it." Celia stood abruptly, her chair scraping the tile. "You think you're some kind of martyr now? Please." She laughed, bitter and bright. "Just because you finally grew a spine doesn't mean anyone owes you a medal." I didn't respond. I let her words sit in the room like a lit match. She stormed off, muttering something under her breath. Something like, "Always the victim." Leora turned to me, her voice clipped. "You've made your point. Now what?" I gathered the papers and slid them back into my coat. That was my warning. She blinked. Once, twice. But she didn't speak again. I rose, walked past the chair where I used to sit, swinging my legs too short to reach the floor, and left the kitchen. That night, I packed everything back into the small suitcase I never fully unpacked. Before zipping it shut, I glanced out the window. The snow had started again. Light, steady, relentless. They thought I was bluffing. They didn't know I wasn't angry anymore. I was planning. 2 weeks slid by, slow as thawing snow. I stayed in the guest room like a houseplant someone forgot to water. Quiet, still, watching everything unfold from the corner. Then came the press event. The living room had been stripped of anything real. Throw pillows fluffed, lighting adjusted, family portraits turned just so. A dozen people buzzed around, balancing notepads, lens caps, and plastic smiles. Outside, winter was fading, slush creeping in under car tires like regret that wouldn't stay buried. Celia stood center stage, literally. Her fitted blazer sparkled just enough to catch the cameras. Leora hovered behind her like a stage manager, nodding at everything, correcting what didn't need fixing. Dad sat off to the side, eyes dim, the television remote in his hand, though the TV was off. And me? I stood just beyond the frame, holding a tray of champagne glasses someone handed me. No one asked. I just happened to be there, and that was enough for them to assume. They posed for photos, Celia front and center, Leora smiling like nothing in her life had ever gone sideways. Dad, blinking slow, like he'd given up long ago. I shifted to stay out of the camera's view, like a reflection they didn't want catching the light. I used to think being invisible was peace. It's just a quieter kind of hell. A man in a tan suit approached me, not even glancing at my face. "Mind grabbing a few more glasses? Some of us missed the first round." Before I could respond, Celia laughed. "She's not staff, she's—" She paused. "Well, she's helping." Leora didn't even look my way. "Don't take it personally, dear." That word again. Dear. Used like a dismissal, not affection. I stepped back, the tray still balanced in my hand. My fingers tightened around the edge of the silver rim. I could feel the glass vibrating against the metal, just enough to remind me I was holding something fragile. I set the tray down, quietly, and walked toward the back of the room. No one followed, no one noticed. I heard laughter again, followed by camera flashes, and then, "Marin? She's just between jobs. She helps when she can." Celia's voice. It was casual, too. Casual. I knew that tone. It was the one she used when she wanted someone to believe something that wasn't true, but sounded good enough not to question. Between jobs, between worth, between being seen. I didn't think. I just moved. Celia was mid-sentence, leaning in to charm a major sponsor from a Chicago athletic firm. Leora hovered nearby, nodding along. I stepped directly in front of them, my voice calm. "You're welcome." Celia blinked, surprised. For the venue, the catering, the contact list. Every bit of this came from my network, Clients I worked with for years, not because I was between jobs, but because I built something they respected. The room froze. Even the reporter who'd been scribbling notes paused mid-stroke. Celia's smile dropped a quarter inch. Leora's eyes narrowed, lips pressing into a tight curve that was supposed to pass for pleasant. I didn't look at either of them. Instead, I picked up one of the empty glasses from the nearby table, turned it slowly in my hand, then set it down right in front of the sponsor, gently, deliberately. The lights flickered then, just once, a soft pulse overhead, like the house itself held its breath. They wanted me to stay in the dark, but light always remembers where it came from. I turned and began to walk away. That's when Celia grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to stop me. "If you embarrass me again," she whispered through gritted teeth, "you'll regret it." I looked her straight in the eye. "You've mistaken silence for weakness." And then I walked away, heels steady on the slush-coated floor. My steps didn't echo, but they might as well have. I didn't look back, not at Celia, not at the cameras, not at the carefully curated lie that had just begun to crack. 3 days passed. The snow was melting in layers, just like the last pieces of my restraint. The Holt house stayed as stiff and composed as always, but under it, something had shifted. I could feel it. That evening, I was at my apartment, a small studio above a closed antique shop, the kind of place no one in my family would have stepped foot in unless they were lost. The kettle was whistling. I was pouring tea when the knock came, too sharp, too fast. I opened the door to find Celia, mascara slightly smudged, hair pulled back so tight it made her face look thinner. She didn't wait for an invitation. She shoved past me and stood in the center of the room like she owned it. "You humiliated me," she snapped. I didn't respond. I walked back to the counter, picked up my tea, and took a slow sip. "Sponsors are calling, asking questions." I met her eyes. They deserve answers. Her laugh was sharp and dry. "Truth doesn't matter in business, Marin. Perception does." I nodded once. "Funny, that's how we were raised, isn't it? Look good, no matter what it costs." That got to her. I saw it in the way her shoulders tensed. "You'll apologize," she said, voice quieter now, but colder. "Tonight, before this spreads." I turned toward the window. The streetlights outside cast long shadows. I didn't say anything. She stepped closer. "Marin!" And then her hand moved, but this time I was ready. I caught her wrist midair, gently but firmly. The same hand that once slapped me across the face in the kitchen now hovered in mine, powerless. "Don't," I said, not loud, just enough. Something passed between us in that moment. Not fear, not regret. Something older, like recognition. She yanked her arm back. "You think you've got leverage?" Her voice cracked. "You think you've won something because you embarrassed me in front of people." I set my cup down. "I think," I said slowly, "you forgot where the money's coming from." Her lips parted, confused. "The sponsorship fund you've been bragging about? The checks run through my company's account. The donors? They came through my business partners. The gala you're planning? It's funded with leftover grants from my architecture outreach program." Celia went pale. "You're lying." "I'm prepared to forward the documentation. Would you prefer the sponsors see it first or the press?" Silence. For once, she didn't have a comeback. Then, as if summoned by the heat of unraveling control, my phone rang. "Mom." I didn't answer, but I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the third call, I picked up. Her voice was already raised. "What the hell are you doing, Marin? You're tearing this family apart. The phones won't stop. Celia's crying. Our reputation." "Then I'd start preparing for the truth," I interrupted, my voice steady. Because the story's about to change. I hung up. Celia was still standing there, breathing hard, her pride fighting to stay upright. But something had already collapsed behind her eyes. "You're cruel," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm finally honest." She slammed the door on her way out. I didn't flinch. I walked over to the lamp in the corner and turned it off. The room dipped into quiet. "Lights off," I whispered to myself. "I pay for my own now." Later that night, as I lay on the futon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Joan. "If you go through with this, there's no turning back," her voice warned gently. "Are you ready to be seen?" I stared at the ceiling, heart calm for the first time in weeks. For 34 years, I waited to be seen. I think I'm done waiting. 1 week later, the Minneapolis Civic Center was humming with spotlights, expensive heels, and carefully ironed lies. From the third row, I sat straight backed in a navy dress I'd worn once to a firm's merger dinner. My name wasn't on the guest list, but my presence no longer required permission. The banners hanging above the rink were glossy and triumphant. Celia Holt, Ice and Grace. Grace, I thought. That's what they always called control when it came dressed in glitter. Joan slid into the seat beside me, her scarf still smelling faintly of rosemary and wind. She leaned in just slightly and whispered, "They still don't know you're the one funding this?" I kept my gaze on the ice as the music swelled. "They will." The program listed a special donation drive for underprivileged youth, tied to a foundation Celia claimed as her passion project. The same foundation I built into my firm's charitable wing last year, the same one whose tax ID still had my name attached at every legal corner. Joan murmured again, "They're still using your name to shine their lights." I smiled, just enough to show a back tooth. Not for much longer. As Celia's program began, the cameras panned to catch her dazzling smile. She performed her opening routine like clockwork, precise, poised, mechanical. I'd seen her practice that routine in our driveway once, back when she used an overturned flower pot as a cone, and I clapped even when she fell. But this time, the silence in my chest was louder than the applause. Then it happened. Halfway through the broadcast, the screen behind her flickered and rolled into the sponsor showcase, company names rising in clean, proud font. And there it was, bold and undeniable. Marin Holt Design Group Primary Gala. Sponsor Joan didn't flinch. She just reached into her coat pocket and took out a mint. The air in the arena shifted. Whispering began. A ripple of voices. A few gasps. The kind of hush that only follows surprise in spaces where everything's scripted. Celia wobbled at the end of her spin. Her arm shook slightly as she lifted into her final pose. For the first time, she didn't land perfect. When the music ended, she didn't bow. She looked directly toward the crowd, toward me, and I didn't look away. After the lights dimmed, I stepped into the hallway near the dressing rooms. The cement walls smelled like hairspray and old ambition. I waited, arms crossed, heart steady. Celia found me first. "You planned this," she hissed, still in her sequins, still in denial. I met her eyes, voice quiet. "No, you did, when you erased me." Her mouth opened, then closed. That was always the problem. She was trained for showtime, not reality. Leora's voice pierced the moment like a blade. She stormed down the hall, coat draped over one shoulder, phone in hand. "What did you do? You're destroying us." I turned toward her, calm. "I stopped building the pedestal you stood on." It was quiet after that. Too quiet. Halden stood a few steps behind them, not saying a word, but his hand had slipped from Leora's elbow. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, there was something in his face I hadn't seen in decades. Regret. The press found us seconds later, flashes firing, questions flying. "Ms. Holt, are you confirming sponsorship?" Is this a family business dispute? Were you always behind the charity funding? Celia's smile returned, too sharp at the edges. But it couldn't hold. I didn't answer. I just walked past the cameras, past the microphones, past the spotlight that was finally mine to choose. Voiceover, quiet but firm. For years, they made me invisible. Tonight, they wished I still was. The morning after the gala, the world moved faster than I'd ever seen it. News anchors spoke my sister's name like it was a crime scene headline. Olympic hopeful under fire for misuse of charity funds. Every few minutes, another outlet picked up the story. Local papers, skating blogs, even national channels. The footage replayed, Celia's frozen expression under the spotlights, my company's name glowing behind her. It was like watching an empire crumble in daylight. The phone started ringing at 7. I let the first few go to voicemail, thinking maybe they'd tire out. They didn't. Finally, I picked up. "Fix this," my mother's voice snapped through the line before I could say hello. "You can still make a statement, say it was an accounting mistake, that you didn't mean to embarrass your sister." I looked out the window at the thawing snow, soft sunlight glinting on the wet streets. "It wasn't a mistake," I said. "Marin, don't you dare take that tone with me." "I'm not taking a tone," I said quietly. "I'm just done pretending." There was a pause, one so long I could almost hear her heartbeat through the static. Then, the line went dead. For a moment I stood there, letting the silence settle around me. The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to survive long enough to be heard. By noon, the sponsors had begun releasing statements, reviewing partnerships, suspending collaborations. Each one felt like a domino I'd nudged months ago finally tipping over. Then came the voicemail. Her voice, Celia's, was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "You ruined my life. Are you happy now?" I didn't reply. I listened once, deleted it, and whispered to no one. "I'm free." That evening, as the sun began to sink, I heard a car pull up outside my building. The knock on the door was hesitant, almost polite. When I opened it, my father stood there, older than I remembered. His winter coat hung loose. His hands were trembling slightly. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside. He sat at the small table near the window, eyes darting around my modest apartment like it was a foreign country. Finally, he said, "I should have come sooner." I waited. "Your mother, she used your name," he said slowly. "On the papers, for years. The accounts, the contracts for Celia's training. She signed as you. I didn't stop her." I stared at him, unsure if I should laugh or cry. "Why?" His voice broke. "Because I thought it was love. I thought we were helping her. She was special. She had a gift. And you didn't seem to want the same kind of life." "Love," I repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. "Love isn't theft with prettier words, Dad." He nodded, shame written all over him. For once, there was no defense left. He looked at me, eyes glistening, and whispered, "I'm sorry." When he stood to leave, the morning light caught his face, thin and tired. I turned on the lamp by the window, the same one I'd turned off that night after Celia left. "You see?" I said softly, not sure if he heard me. "I don't need your lights anymore." He stopped in the doorway, then gave a small nod before stepping out. After he left, I opened my laptop. The legal documents sat ready. Every transaction, every misuse of funds, every falsified signature. I hit send. It was time. The press would have their headlines. The lawyers would have their statements. But for me, the story was already over. A week later, the settlement cleared. I directed part of it to a mentorship fund for young women in design, girls who'd been told to shrink so someone else could shine. My pain, recycled into freedom. They called it revenge. I called it returning what was mine. As snow began to fall again, I stepped outside, letting the flakes land on my scarf. For the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like air. 6 months passed. Spring crept into Duluth like a gentle apology. The lake outside my window no longer groaned with ice, and the sun arrived earlier each day, curious but not imposing. I'd painted the front door of my little house a soft green, a color that felt like beginning again without needing to announce itself. I was halfway through touching up the trim when I heard Joan's car pull into the driveway. She never honked, just turned off the engine, got out, and let the gravel speak for her. She climbed the porch steps with 2 coffee cups in hand and a familiar, amused smile. "Well, if it isn't the woman who broke the internet," she said, handing me one of the cups. "And now she's using a paintbrush like a sword." I chuckled and brushed a smudge of paint off my cheek with my wrist. "You should see my closet. I own 3 pairs of overalls now. I'm practically a contractor." Joan looked at me for a beat, really looked. "You seem content." I sipped the coffee. It was warm, nutty, just right. It took me 34 years to learn the difference between silence and peace. Inside, the house was spare. Clean lines, soft colors, no clutter. The lake view through the windows did most of the decorating. Joan trailed behind me as I placed the paint tray in the sink. "You never told me how you found this place," she said. "Craigslist ad," I replied. "Buried under pet-sitting gigs and someone trying to sell gently used taxidermy. I clicked on it by accident." Joan laughed. "That sounds about right." We settled into the small living room. A gentle breeze nudged the curtains as we sat. On the shelf behind me was something I hadn't thought about in years until I unpacked it last week. A small silver charm shaped like an ice rink. Celia had given it to me when we were girls, said it was for luck, though back then, that word meant very different things to both of us. Joan's eyes landed on it. "You kept that?" "For a long time, I thought it meant she loved me," I said, carefully placing the charm into a small donation box on the floor beside the bookshelf. "Now I think it just meant she needed me quiet." Neither of us spoke for a while. It was the kind of quiet that didn't press down on your chest, the kind that let you breathe deeper. When Joan went to grab napkins from the kitchen, I stepped out to check the mailbox. Bills, flyers, and one letter, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. I'd seen it 1,000 times on notes stuck to the fridge, on competition forms, on birthday cards I was never really meant to keep. Celia. I carried the envelope inside like it might burn. Joan returned just as I sat down again. She looked at my face, then at the letter. "You okay?" I nodded, though my hand said otherwise. I opened it slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter began. "I just hope you skate free someday, like I never could." That was all. No apologies, no explanations. Just a sentence that felt less like closure and more like surrender. I didn't cry. I folded the paper, slid it under a glass paperweight on the desk. I didn't need to reply. Some chapters don't get rewritten. Joan took her coffee to the porch, giving me space. I followed after a few minutes, sitting beside her in silence. Across the lake, a group of children played on the muddy grass where the ice used to be. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. I thought about the galas, the trophies, the high-gloss family portraits. I thought about the long nights in empty rooms, the endless swallowing of words, the nods of approval that always came just a little too late. "No," I said. "I miss who I was before I learned to disappear." Joan placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. As the sun dipped lower, we went back inside. I turned on the lamp by the window, the same one I once turned off in defiance. Now it just lit the room. Nothing symbolic, just warm, safe. For years, they made me believe I didn't deserve light. Turns out, I just needed to buy my own bulb. I walked Joan to her car, The breeze carried the smell of thawing earth and pine. Spring had taken its time, but it came anyway. Before she left, she looked back. "You know," she said, "I never believed you were invisible." "I didn't either," I said, smiling. "Not anymore." Later that night, after the dishes were put away and the house had gone quiet again, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, not searching for flaws or checking for approval, just seeing myself. And I looked whole. Before bed, I stepped out once more. The snow was nearly gone, reduced to patches clinging to the base of trees and the north side of fences. The air was cool, but it didn't sting. In the distance, where the rink used to sit, there was only open grass now, soft, uneven, free. They lost everything they built on lies. I found everything I needed in truth. Peace doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just comes with quiet.